But when you actually look at cortisol, when you look at leptin, it makes sense to possibly fast a little bit less, or at least keep close tabs on it. Let's dive into it. So it has to do with cortisol. Mainly, cortisol has a very unique effect on the body. Cortisol is good, but it's also bad, right? I would say more often than not, it's good. I mean, cortisol stimulates hormone-sensitive lipase. It's what allows us to get a lot of fat-burning potential out of a fast, but too much of it can also cause some pretty serious issues, mainly in the way of damaging lean people. So overweight people don't have as much of a negative effect from cortisol during a fast as lean people do. Well, it does make practical sense because when a lean person fasts, their cortisol levels will go up more because the fast is a bigger threat to them. Starving a lean person is a much scarier scenario than starving a person with that on them. The person with that on them has some to survive off of. So my body says, whoa, whoa, whoa. You're fasting. So cortisol levels go up. And this was actually demonstrated in a study that was published in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology Metabolism. They looked at men and women, but they looked at lean women that were fasting, and they found that all these different reproductive systems got thrown out of whack when they would fast for too long. But they also found their cortisol levels elevated significantly more than those that weren't lean during a 72 hours fast. So again, kind of tells us the same thing, but then we have to connect the dots as to why this could be a problem and why we have to be careful if a lean person fasts and cortisol levels go up. Cortisol sort of reallocates the kind of fat that we have. So I've seen studies where fasting can actually stimulate the production of visceral fat. But now if you start looking deeper in, you find maybe if the person is lean and they're fasting too much and their cortisol levels are elevated, it can trigger more visceral fat accumulation. Why is visceral fat bad? Because this visceral fat has metabolically and immunologically active components to it. It is full of what are called macrophages. Now, to give you context, visceral fat is a good thing to protect us from pathogenic bacteria in our gut. So if we were to ever go septic or we were to ever have bacteria from our gut leach into our abdominal cavity or into our bloodstream, our first line of defense is actually the visceral fat has so many immune cells in it that it would attack it immediately and try to do its best job at keeping us safe. So why is it bad? Because if we start having too much of it, then it's constantly leaking immunologically active compounds, triggering an inflammatory response within our body. So we could be lean on the outside and look amazing, but kind of rotting on the inside with a lot of visceral fat and leaking inflammation kind of making us feel like garbage. What do we do if you're already lean and you want to continue fasting? What do you do to make sure your cortisol levels don't go through the roof? I've got some plans for you, but I also want to talk about leptin for a second. Leptin is also a thing that goes down when we fast. Leptin is already going to be lower when we're lean. It's one of the ways that our body protects us as we get leaner. Leptin signaling slows down so our brain doesn't just reset the metabolism. So leptin is secreted by our fat. The less fat that is on our body, the less leptin that is telling the brain to revel the metabolism. So it's a good thing, right? But when we fast, we lower leptin even more. So you run the risk of crushing your metabolism a little bit more than someone that's overweight. Someone that's overweight has plenty of leptin signaling happening, and they can afford to have it crushed a little bit during a fast. As a lean person, you probably don't want to crush your leptin levels too much. You want to keep them stimulated so that you can keep your metabolism nice and hot so that you don't gain fat easier. So the quick answer to all of this is simple. And this one that I've talked about a lot is fasting 2 or 3 days per week, once you're already lean, and let fasting be the anomaly. Okay, again, common theme with a lot of my videos, fasting should continue to be the acute stressor, not the chronic stressor in your body. If you are overweight already, you can actually get away with fasting a little bit more. But the reality is if you do have more fat on you, you can get away with it. So I would recommend 2 to 3 days per week of fasting for lean people. The other things that you want to consider doing are going to be cortisol mitigation efforts. Cinnamon during a fast becomes your best friend. If you're ready, lean because you're fasting for other reasons. At this point, you're not trying to get leaner unless you have kind of a dysmorphic image of yourself. You're already lean, you're trying to do it for cognitive. So don't worry about having some cinnamon or some little things that might potentially break a fast because those can mitigate cortisol quite tremendously. Another thing that you want to make sure that you're taken care of is, of course, your electrolytes. Keep your electrolytes stable, because when you start to go into a shocked system because your electrolytes are out of whack, you can trigger catecholine to be all cattywampus and causes other issues. So be paying very close attention to maintaining decent levels of sodium, potassium, magnesium throughout the course of your fast as well. Very, very important. The big picture is we do not want to convert our fat and do this real fat. You could be getting leaner on the outside, but not the kind of lean that you want deep on the inside. So keeping the cortisol levels up keeping a leptin level spike, and one of the ways that you can get your leptin levels back up after fasting is, believe it or not, having some carbohydrates from time to time. But carbohydrates are going to spike a heavier leptin drive than fats and protein will. As a matter of fact, fats and proteins don't stimulate much leptin and all carbohydrates. Do so periodically when you come off of your fast. Feel free to have some carbohydrates so you drive that leptin value up and therefore also blunt cortisol insulin as much as we don't like it a lot of times. Also blunt cortisol. So coming out of your fast, having some carbohydrates could be a way to, well, I don't know.